I stared at the ceiling of the tent, barely blinking, waiting to hear something else, but whoever or whatever it was didn't make another sound. I waited there for God knows how long, praying they'd walk away, but then out of nowhere, I heard a flick, that sharp, unmistakable sound of a lighter. A small orange glow appeared through the fabric of the tent, maybe waist height, a few feet off to the side. Whoever was out there held the flame steady for a few seconds, then started waving it around slowly. I didn't move. I just stared at it, trying not to make a sound. And then the flame got bigger, way bigger. It went from a flicker to a glow, like they'd lit something, a torch, maybe. Then, without warning, the person dropped whatever they were holding. I heard it hit the dirt with a dull thump, and a second later, the side of the tent lit up. The heat came fast, way faster than I expected, and within seconds, the fire started spreading. That's what finally snapped me out of my haze. I woke Tiki up, and she immediately realized what was happening. We scrambled, no time to think. We started tossing our stuff out of the tent and onto the dirt. I'm not even sure we got everything. We sprinted out of the tent while the fire spread. Tiki grabbed one of our water jugs and dumped it on the fire, while I tried stomping out anything that had caught on fire. Eventually, we got it under control. Half the tent was completely ruined. I grabbed the flashlight and started scanning the area around the tent, looking for the person who had just tried to kill us, but there was no one. At least, no one I could see. Tiki started packing up our stuff, and I quickly followed suit. We started speed walking what we thought was the direction of the truck. There weren't any landmarks, and it was dark. So we were practically guessing. After a few minutes, it became clear we were turned round at some point, maybe 10 minutes into walking. I heard it again. That same distant scream we'd heard the first 2 nights. Only this time, it didn't stop. It kept going like an animal was in constant pain. And then another scream started from somewhere else. And then another one. They were all coming from behind us. But it was clear that there were multiple things out there. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed Tiki's arm and started moving faster. By some miracle, we actually found the truck. We practically threw all of our stuff into it, and I drove off as fast as I could. I couldn't go too fast, though the road was rough and without any light. Besides my high beams, it felt like every dip and bend could flip us after what felt like forever. We finally hit a main road. I didn't stop speeding until I saw other cars again. Tiki was holding it together, but I could tell she wanted to cry, and I was doing a really bad job of consoling her. We did call the police to report everything that happened. All I can think about all this is how, if I weren't such a light sleeper, my girlfriend and I could have been murdered that night in the middle of the desert. This is important context for what I'm about to tell you. So I'm going to start here. I've always been a little suspicious of my mom's past. Suspicious isn't exactly the right word, but I can't think of a better one. She was born in Mexico and spent her childhood there before moving to the States alone to pursue an undergrad degree. The rest is history. She found work, met my dad, and has lived in America ever since. I don't really know a lot about her life before America. And there's a part of me that thinks that's by design. She avoids talking about her past entirely and dismisses any questions about it with a joke or by changing the subjects. Growing up, my dad always told me that it was because she had some childhood trauma that was better left undiscussed. And I believed that for the longest time. I mean, why wouldn't I? But as I grew older, I started getting more and more curious and would often marvel at how skilled my mom was at dodging those kinds of questions at family gatherings and whatnot. Here's what I do know: she lived in a border town somewhere in northern Mexico. along the Texas border. It doesn't have the best reputation being a border town. And all the closest I've ever gotten to knowing anything about her parents is a joke that she told a few times. When I was younger, she would laugh that her dad's side of the family were the politicians and her mom's side were the crooks, but she was never able to tell which was which. I never read into it as anything beyond a cynical political joke, but as I grew older, I started wondering whether there was more truth to that statement than I had originally thought. Her dad worked for the government in some capacity, and she never spoke about her mother. Not once. The only other piece of information I have is a name. I'm not going to write it out. So I'm just going to call him R. One night when I was around 10 or 11, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I was walking past our living room, I heard my mom speaking in a quiet voice. I didn't understand Spanish, but she repeated R's name multiple times, the way someone talking about someone would, as opposed to someone speaking directly to someone. All the lights in there were off, so I couldn't actually see her, but I could hear her. Even though I knew it was just mom, my young self was still a little scared of the dark, so I instinctively flipped the light switch on. She didn't scream or even react to the light. It was like she was anticipating that I'd be there instead. She immediately hung up the phone and glared at me with a look I had never seen from her. She told me to go back to bed, and I did, and that's it. That's basically all I know about my mother's past. A joke, her dad's very vague occupation, and the name R, what I'm about to tell you, happened almost a year ago to date, and it's been on my mind a lot recently. I'm from Arizona, lived there my whole life. I was a year removed from graduating college, and I was driving through the desert on my way to meet up with one of my old college friends. It was a really long drive on talking road trip hours, and I was tired of listening to music. I'm not a podcast guy, so I was low key cycling through my contacts, calling up all my friends and whatever girls I happened to be talking to. Eventually, I decided to call my mom. We're both really into soccer, so we were talking about the upcoming Champions League fixtures and how exciting the matchups were. She's got some serious knowledge on the sport, so the two of us can talk soccer wherever, out of nowhere. I saw two pickup trucks blocking the road up ahead. It didn't look like a car accident, so I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I was worried that someone might need help or something. So I slowed down as I approached. My mom was still on the phone, but I hadn't let her know what was happening. I stopped my car and sat there wondering if it would be a good idea to get out. Before I could do anything, three men sprang out from the two cars, all holding guns. I froze up and realized there was another car quickly approaching mine from behind. I was unarmed, so compliance was really my only choice. At that point, one of the men tapped his gun on my door, motioning for me to get out. The other two stood a little further back. I put my hands up and slowly got out of my car. By that point, the car behind me had fully caught up and was parked a little ways away. The man barked a few commands in Spanish, but I didn't understand what they were saying. I consider my inability to speak Spanish one of my biggest failures in life, especially as a Mexican American. And in that moment, not being able to at least communicate with my assailants, I wanted to die. It didn't take a translator to know what they wanted me to do, though before I knew it, my phone keys, wallet, and other personal belongings were in their possession, and it looked like I was going to be stranded in a barren desert with no viable escape. One of the men got into my truck, and that's when things took a turn. I realized I hadn't hung up the phone with my mom, and since my truck was still running, she was still on the line. I watched through my driver's side window as the man reached his finger toward the screen as if to hang up, only to pull it back like he had changed his mind. I kept watching, and it seemed like he was listening. I instantly connected the dots. My mom must have been speaking to him. Eventually, I saw his lips start moving and realized they were having a full on conversation in there. I obviously couldn't hear anything because the windows and doors were closed, but I knew they were speaking Spanish. I swear, in my life, I am 90% sure. He repeated our name a few times, like my mom had said it, and he was making sure he heard it correctly. At some point, the other guys must have realized what was going on because they stopped guarding me and approached the car. The guy inside rolled the window down and stared at me as he spoke to the other two men. After he finished talking, all three of them turned and stared at me as if sizing me up. The conversation didn't last long. After that, they hung up the phone and walked back over to me. They handed me all my stuff back, including my car keys. The only thing they took was the cash in my wallet. One of the men looked at me, smiled, and in a thick accent said, "Tax," as he did it. I had never been more happy to lose all my cash in my life as I drove away. All three cars, including the one that had been behind me, started speeding off into the desert away from the road. My plan was to try memorizing their license plates, but none of the cars had any. I was still in shock after a few minutes of driving. I called my mother back and demanded an explanation. She told me that she had simply threatened to call the police on them as she was tracking my location and knew exactly where I was. I told her that was obviously BS and insisted she tell me what they had really been talking about. She was adamant about her story though and told me most of the Spanish was just her pleading a case. Even though I didn't believe her story, there was nothing I could do but accept it. I asked her to call the police for me, and she said she would. Eventually, we ended the call, and I drove the rest of the way in complete silence. In all honesty, I blocked that experience out of my mind for as long as I could, but over time, I just couldn't anymore. I'm becoming more and more sure that my mom had some kind of tie to a Mexican gang or cartel growing up, and even scarier, maybe that tie didn't end when she left Mexico. She knows I'm not stupid. Though I don't know how much longer she expects to keep the charade up. I feel like I should just straight up ask her, but I'm really worried about what kind of tension that might create, or worse, what kind of world I might be getting myself into should she tell me the truth. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.